Marcus Chen had never expected his routine salvage mission to turn into the most significant moment in human history. The derelict ship floating in the asteroid belt looked like any other piece of space junk, twisted metal and broken dreams left behind by some long-dead civilization. But as he maneuvered his small salvage vessel closer, something felt different about this one. The hull wasn't human. That much was obvious. The curves and angles followed patterns that no Earth-born engineer would ever conceive. Strange symbols covered the surface, glowing faintly with an inner light that pulsed like a dying heartbeat. Marcus had found alien artifacts before, but nothing that still seemed so alive. "Control, this is Salvage 7. He spoke into his comm. "I've got something unusual out here." Requesting backup. Static crackled back. -7. "You're on the edge of our range. Document and proceed with standard salvage protocols." Marcus sighed. Standard protocols meant scan, catalog, and haul back to the processing station. But as he ran his sensors over the vessel, the readings made no sense. The ship was massive, easily 10 times larger than his own craft, yet somehow his instruments kept insisting it was barely the size of a shuttle pod. Energy readings flickered between 0 and off the charts. Impossible. "Computer, run a diagnostic on the sensor array. All systems operating within normal parameters," came the mechanical reply. Something was definitely wrong here. Marcus had been salvaging for 15 years, ever since the war ended, and Earth needed every scrap of metal and technology they could find to rebuild. He'd developed instincts about these things, and every instinct was screaming at him to turn around and head home. But curiosity had always been humanity's greatest strength and greatest weakness. Marcus docked with the alien vessel. The moment his airlock connected, the lights inside the derelict ship flickered to life. Not the harsh white illumination of human technology, but something warmer, more organic. The walls themselves seemed to glow with bioluminescent patterns that shifted and moved like living tissue. Marcus checked his suit's atmosphere readings twice before trusting them. The air inside was actually breathable, not just breathable, but perfect. The right mixture of nitrogen and oxygen, the ideal temperature and humidity. It was as if the ship had somehow adapted itself to human physiology in the few seconds since he'd docked. "That's impossible," he muttered, but stepped inside anyway. The corridors were vast and cathedral-like, with sweeping arches that seemed to stretch impossibly high. Everything was proportioned for beings much larger than humans. Yet somehow Marcus felt comfortable walking through the space. His footsteps echoed strangely, as if the ship was listening to him. He followed the main corridor toward what his scanner suggested was the ship's center. Along the way, he passed rooms filled with technology he couldn't begin to understand. Crystalline structures that hummed with power, organic-looking computers that pulsed with the same rhythm as a heartbeat, and what looked like weapons that seemed more grown than manufactured. The central chamber took his breath away. It was enormous, easily large enough to hold a small city, with walls that curved up into darkness above. But it wasn't the size that stopped him in his tracks, it was the figure in the center. She was definitely female, though calling her human would be generous. Her skin had a subtle scaled pattern that caught the light like precious metal, and her hair fell in waves of deep crimson that seemed to move with a life of its own. She was tall, at least 8 feet, and built like a warrior, with lean muscle visible beneath her strange, form-fitting armor. But it was the wings that really gave her away. Massive, bat-like structures that stretched out from her back, covered in the same metallic scales as her skin. They were folded now, but Marcus could see the power in them. The way they twitched slightly with each breath she took. She was wounded, badly. Dark liquid that might have been blood seeped from dozens of cuts across her body, and her breathing was labored. She lay on what looked like an altar or medical platform, surrounded by humming machines that seemed to be keeping her alive. Marcus knew he should leave. Every protocol said to avoid contact with unknown alien life forms, especially ones that looked like they could tear him in half without breaking a sweat. But something about her stopped him. Maybe it was the way she looked so vulnerable despite her obvious power. Or maybe it was the simple human impulse to help someone who was hurt. He took a step closer. Then another. The machines around her hummed louder, and strange lights began to pulse more rapidly. Her eyes snapped open. They were golden, with vertical pupils like a cat's, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made his knees weak. She said something in a language that sounded like music and thunder combined, full of notes that human vocal cords could never produce. Marcus raised his hands peacefully. "I don't understand," he said. "I'm sorry, I don't speak your language." She tried to sit up and gasped in pain, fresh blood flowing from her wounds. Without thinking, Marcus rushed forward and caught her shoulder, steadying her before she could fall. The moment his hand touched her skin, everything changed. Power flooded through him, not electricity, but something far more fundamental. It was like touching the heart of a star, feeling the raw force that held the universe together. For an instant, Marcus saw through her eyes, felt what she felt, understood things that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. She was ancient beyond measure, older than human civilization. She was royalty among her people, a being of immense power who had been fleeing some terrible catastrophe. Her ship was dying, her wounds were mortal, and she had been drifting in the void for longer than Earth had been inhabited by humans. And in that moment of contact, she saw him too. Saw humanity through his memories and experiences. Saw a young species that had barely learned to walk among the stars, yet had survived a devastating war and was now reaching out to help a stranger. She saw courage and curiosity, stubbornness and compassion, all the contradictory qualities that made humans so unique in the galaxy. The contact lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. When Marcus pulled his hand away, the Dragon Lady's wounds were already beginning to close. The blood stopped flowing, the cuts sealed themselves, and color returned to her metallic skin. She stared at him in shock, speaking rapidly in her musical language. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but he could see the amazement in her golden eyes. She touched the places where her worst injuries had been, finding only smooth, healed skin. "I don't know how I did that," Marcus said honestly. "I was just trying to help." She seemed to understand his tone, if not his words. She struggled to sit up, moving more easily now, and placed her hand over her heart, in what was clearly some kind of salute or gesture of respect. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost reverent. Behind her, the ship's systems were coming fully online. The humming grew louder, lights brightened, and Marcus could feel power flowing through the vessel like blood through veins. Whatever had been keeping the ship in its half-dead state was now fully active again. The Dragon Lady stood, towering over Marcus but somehow not seeming threatening. She moved with fluid grace, her wings stretching wide before folding against her back. She was magnificent, beautiful and terrible in the way that forces of nature were beautiful and terrible. She gestured to the walls around them, where holographic displays were beginning to activate. Star charts appeared, showing vast territories marked with symbols Marcus couldn't read, trade routes, alliance boundaries, and what looked like fleet positions spread across hundreds of star systems. The scope of it was staggering. Humans had barely managed to colonize their own solar system, and here was evidence of a galactic civilization so vast it made Earth seem like a grain of sand on an infinite beach. The Dragon Lady touched one of the displays, and it zoomed in on a familiar yellow star. Earth's solar system appeared, marked with symbols that pulsed ominously red. She turned to Marcus and spoke urgently, pointing at the display and then at him. Marcus didn't need a translator to understand the message. Something was coming for Earth, something that had driven this powerful being to flee her own territory. Something that could wound someone who seemed nearly invulnerable. She touched another control, and the display showed ships, massive vessels that dwarfed anything in Earth's navy, moving in formations that suggested military precision. They were heading toward the outer edge of human space, and at their current speed, they would arrive within months. "Oh hell," Marcus breathed. The Dragon Lady seemed to understand his expression. She nodded grimly and touched his shoulder, careful to keep the contact brief this time. When she spoke, her tone was apologetic, but urgent. Marcus looked around the chamber, taking in the scope of the technology surrounding him. This ship alone could probably take on Earth's entire fleet and win. The weapons he'd glimpsed on his way in were beyond anything human science had achieved. And if this woman was fleeing from something, that something had to be orders of magnitude more dangerous. But she had sought refuge in human space. More than that, she had been healed by human touch. Marcus didn't understand the how or why of it, but he could see the implications. She needed humanity's help, but more than that, she seemed to think that humans could actually provide it. The Dragon Lady moved to another console and began calling up more displays. She showed him her own people, beings like herself, tall and proud and powerful, with the same metallic scales and massive wings. She showed him their worlds, beautiful planets with crystal cities and floating spires that reached into the clouds. Then she showed him what had happened to those worlds. The displays changed to images of devastation. Cities burning, populations fleeing, ships destroyed in space. Whatever had attacked her people had done so with overwhelming force and ruthless efficiency. Marcus watched the holographic records of entire civilizations being wiped out, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the chamber. This was what was coming for Earth. This was why she had fled to the outer edge of human space. She touched the display again, showing him the attacking fleet in more detail. The ships were dark, angular things that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved in perfect formations, like a swarm of insects directed by a single mind. And there were thousands of them. "How do we fight something like that?" Marcus asked, knowing she couldn't understand the words but hoping she might understand the tone. The Dragon Lady looked at him for a long moment, then did something unexpected. She smiled. It was a predatory expression, full of sharp teeth and dangerous promise, but there was something else there too. Hope. She gestured to herself, then to him, then to the star chart showing Earth. She spoke rapidly, her musical voice taking on tones of excitement and determination. Whatever she was saying, it wasn't surrender. Marcus felt the ship shudder slightly as systems that had been dormant for who knows how long came fully online. The Dragon Lady moved to what was clearly the command console, her fingers dancing over controls that responded to her touch like living things. The main display showed space outside the ship, and Marcus watched in amazement as the view shifted. They were moving, accelerating toward the inner system, at speeds that should have turned him into paste against the bulkhead. But he felt nothing, as if the ship's gravity systems were so advanced that they could completely negate the effects of acceleration. "Where are we going?" he asked. She turned from the console and gestured toward the display showing Earth. Her meaning was clear enough. They were going to warn humanity about what was coming. But Marcus suspected that was only the beginning. As the ship raced toward Earth at impossible speeds, the Dragon Lady continued to work at the various control stations. She seemed to be activating systems throughout the vessel, preparing for something. The ship hummed with barely contained power, and Marcus could feel the potential for destruction in every surface he touched. But there was something else, too. When she had touched him, when their contact had somehow healed her wounds, there had been a moment of perfect understanding. He had seen her people's technology not as incomprehensible alien science, but as tools he could somehow use. It was as if human intuition and draconic knowledge could combine in ways that neither species had achieved on their own. The Dragon Lady seemed to sense his thoughts. She approached him again, moving with that liquid grace, and extended her hand palm up. It was clearly an invitation. Marcus looked at her hand, then at her face. Her golden eyes held an expression he couldn't quite read. But it wasn't threatening. If anything, she seemed curious about what would happen if they made deliberate contact. He reached out and placed his palm against hers. The effect was immediate but controlled this time. Power flowed between them. But instead of the overwhelming rush he had experienced before, it felt like a river finding its proper channel. He could sense her thoughts, not as an invasion but as a sharing. She could feel his mind in return, experiencing human creativity and determination firsthand. Through their connection, she showed him things that no human had ever seen. The true scope of the galaxy, with thousands of species and civilizations spread across millions of worlds, trade networks that spanned impossible distances, technological achievements that bordered on magic. and conflicts that had raged for millennia. But she also showed him humanity's place in all of this. Humans were newcomers, barely noticed by the ancient powers that ruled the galaxy. They were considered primitive, barely evolved beyond their homeworld, of no consequence to anyone. That assessment was about to change dramatically. The Dragon Lady shared her knowledge of the attacking force, and Marcus finally understood what they were dealing with. They called themselves the Devourers. And they were exactly what their name suggested. They consumed entire civilizations, stripping worlds bare of resources and life before moving on to the next target. They had been eating their way across the galaxy for eons, growing stronger with each conquest. Her people, the Drakmari, had been one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. Their technology was based on the manipulation of fundamental forces. Their ships were living things grown rather than built, and their warriors were nearly invincible. They had ruled hundreds of worlds and commanded respect from every other major power. The Devourers had swept through Drakmari space in a matter of weeks, but through their connection, Marcus could see something that gave him hope. The Devourers' strength came from their unity, their perfect coordination, their ability to act as a single mind, controlling billions of bodies. They were unstoppable because they never made mistakes, never hesitated, never acted unpredictably. Humans, on the other hand, were chaos incarnate. They were individuals first and foremost, impossible to predict, capable of moments of brilliance and stupidity that no logical mind could anticipate. They were everything the Devourers were not, and somehow, when human intuition combined with Drakmari technology, the result was something neither species had achieved alone. Marcus could feel it in the ship around him, in the way systems responded to his touch, even though he had no idea how they worked. It was as if the technology was adapting itself to human patterns of thought, becoming something new in the process. The Dragon Lady released his hand, but the connection remained. She spoke, and this time Marcus could understand her words, as if they were being translated directly into his thoughts. My name is Seraphina of the Third House, guardian of the outer reaches, last daughter of the flame. And you, Marcus Chen of Earth, may be the key to saving both our species. Marcus looked around the chamber, taking in the scope of the power at their disposal, feeling the ship race toward Earth with news that would change everything. No pressure, right? Seraphina's predatory smile returned. Pressure is what creates diamonds, Marcus Chen, and we are going to need all the brilliance we can find. As Earth grew larger on the main display, Marcus realized that his quiet life as a salvage operator was over. Whatever came next, humanity was about to take its first real steps into the larger galaxy, and somehow, they were going to have to learn to fight gods. Earth's defense network screamed warnings as Seraphina's ship approached the inner system. Every sensor array from Mars to the outer asteroid belt locked onto the massive vessel, and within minutes, Admiral Sarah Rodriguez was staring at readings that made no sense. Ma'am, the ship is over 3 kilometers long, but our mass detectors insist it weighs less than a shuttle, reported Lieutenant Hayes, his voice tight with confusion. Energy output is off the charts, but it's not showing any weapon signatures we recognize. Admiral Rodriguez had commanded Earth's defense forces since the end of the Unity War, when humanity had finally stopped fighting itself long enough to look toward the stars. She'd seen her share of impossible things, but this was something entirely new. Any response to our hails? Yes, ma'am. We're getting a transmission now, but it's unusual. The main screen flickered, and suddenly Marcus Chen's face appeared. Rodriguez recognized him. She'd approved his salvage license herself years ago. He looked the same as always, except for his eyes. There was something different about his eyes, an intensity that hadn't been there before. Admiral Rodriguez, this is Marcus Chen. I know this looks bad, but I need you to listen very carefully. Humanity is in immediate danger, and the being I'm with might be our only chance for survival. Chen, what the hell are you doing in that ship? Our readings suggest it's armed with enough firepower to level a continent. Marcus glanced off screen, and when he looked back, his expression was grim. Admiral, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, but I need you to trust me. I've made contact with a member of an alien species called the Drakmari. Her name is Seraphina, and she's fleeing from something called the Devourers. They're heading for Earth. Rodriguez felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. Earth's first contact with alien intelligence. And it was bringing news of invasion. How long do we have? According to Serafina's data, their advance forces will reach the outer system in approximately 6 weeks. The main fleet will arrive 2 weeks after that. 6 weeks. Rodriguez had fought in 3 major conflicts, had seen Earth's military capabilities pushed to their absolute limits. They had maybe 200 ships that could be considered combat-worthy. And that was counting patrol craft and converted civilian vessels. Against an enemy that could drive the owners of this incredible ship into flight, it wouldn't be enough. What do they want? She asked. Marcus's expression darkened. Everything. They consume entire worlds, Admiral. Not just the resources, the people, the ecosystems, everything. They leave nothing behind but stripped rock. A new voice entered the transmission, speaking in tones that were beautiful and terrible at the same time. The words were clearly alien. But somehow Rodriguez found she could understand them. It was as if the meaning was being transmitted directly to her mind. I am Serafina of the Third House, Admiral Rodriguez. Your species stands at a crossroads. You can face the Devourers alone and be consumed within days. Or you can accept our alliance and perhaps find a way to survive. Our alliance? Rodriguez had negotiated with warlords and politicians, but she'd never had to conduct diplomacy with someone who could apparently speak directly to her thoughts. What exactly are you proposing? Round. Serafina's image appeared on screen beside Marcus. She was magnificent and alien. Clearly non-human, but somehow beautiful in a way that transcended species. Her golden eyes seemed to look right through the camera and into Rodriguez's soul. My people possess technology far beyond your current capabilities. Our ships, our weapons, our knowledge, all of it is useless against the Devourers because we think as they do. We plan, we organize, we follow logical patterns. They can predict our every move because they once were us. What do you mean they once were us? The Devourers were once individual beings like ourselves. But they chose unity over independence. Efficiency over creativity. They became a collective consciousness, perfect in its coordination, unstoppable in its advance. Every species they encounter faces the same choice: join them or be consumed. Rodriguez felt a chill. And you think humanity is different somehow? Marcus leaned forward on screen. Admiral, when I touched her, when we made that first contact, something incredible happened. Her technology responded to human intuition in ways neither of our species had ever experienced. It's like our chaos complements their order. Your chaos, Serafina continued, is precisely what the Devourers cannot comprehend. They have eliminated unpredictability from their own nature, and so they cannot account for it in others. But they have never encountered a species quite like humanity before. Rodriguez looked around her command center, taking in the faces of her officers. They were all listening to this impossible conversation, trying to process the idea that Earth's fate might depend on how unpredictable they could be. What exactly are you proposing? We share our technology with your people, Serafina said. But not as a simple transfer of information. The technology must be adapted, changed to work with human minds and human instincts. The result will be something neither of our species could have created alone. And in return, you help us fight the Devourers. Not as our subordinates, but as our equals, in an alliance between species. Rodriguez had to admit the offer was tempting, but she'd been in command too long to accept anything at face value. How do we know you're telling the truth? How do we know this isn't some elaborate invasion plan of your own? Serafina was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried an undertone of deep sadness. Because, Admiral Rodriguez, I am the last of my kind. My people chose to fight the Devourers conventionally, with logical tactics and coordinated strategies. We were destroyed in a matter of weeks. I alone escaped, carrying the genetic patterns and technological knowledge of my entire species. The implications hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. This being had watched her entire civilization die, and was now offering humanity the chance to succeed where the Drakmari had failed. 6 weeks isn't very long to integrate alien technology into our military systems, Rodriguez said. Which is why we must begin immediately, Serafina replied. But Admiral, understand that this will not be a simple matter of upgrading your existing ships. The technology I carry requires a fundamental change in how humans think about warfare, about space travel, about the nature of reality itself. Marcus spoke up again. Admiral, I've been on this ship for 18 hours now, and I've seen things that shouldn't be possible. The ship itself is alive. In a way, it responds to thoughts and emotions as much as to direct commands. But when I touch the controls, when I try to interface with the systems, they change. They become something new. Can you give me a demonstration? Marcus looked off screen, presumably at Serafina, who nodded. Admiral, I'm going to transmit our current position and vector. According to your sensors, we should be decelerating to achieve orbit, correct? Rodriguez checked her displays. That's right. At your current speed, you'll overshoot Earth if you don't start braking soon. Watch this. On Rodriguez's tactical display, the alien ship's vector suddenly changed. Not gradually, as any known form of propulsion would require, but instantaneously. One moment it was heading straight for Earth at tremendous velocity. The next it was in a perfect geosynchronous orbit above North America. That's impossible, Lieutenant Hayes whispered. Drakmari ships manipulate space-time itself, Serafina explained. We do not push against the universe to move through it, we convince it to move us. But the techniques required are based on absolute precision, mathematical perfection. When Marcus interfaces with the system, however, it operates on pure intuition. The result is faster, more efficient, and completely unpredictable. Rodriguez stared at the tactical display, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. If humanity could learn to duplicate that kind of capability. I want to come aboard, she said suddenly. Admiral, that might not be wise, Hayes protested. We don't know anything about their biology, their disease vectors, their true intentions. Hayes, if they wanted to destroy Earth, they could have done it already. That ship could probably take on our entire fleet single-handed. Rodriguez stood, her mind already moving to the logistics of what needed to happen next. I want a full diplomatic team assembled within the hour. And get me Dr. Yamamoto from the Xenobiology Department. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. 2 hours later, Rodriguez found herself in the shuttle bay of the most alien vessel humanity had ever encountered. The chamber was vast and cathedral-like, with organic curves that seemed to flow into each other in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Everything was proportioned for beings much larger than humans. Yet somehow, the space felt comfortable rather than intimidating. Serafina was waiting for them, and in person she was even more impressive than she had appeared on screen. She stood nearly 9 feet tall, her metallic scales catching the bioluminescent light that emanated from the walls themselves. Her wings were folded against her back, but Rodriguez could see the power in them, the way they twitched slightly with each breath. Dr. Yamamoto was scanning her with every instrument he'd brought, his eyes wide with scientific fascination. Admiral, her biology is unlike anything in our database. The scales appear to be some kind of organic metal, and her wing structure suggests she can actually fly in atmosphere despite her size. Serafina smiled, revealing sharp teeth. Dr. Yamamoto, I can indeed fly, and much more besides, but such capabilities will mean nothing against the Devourers, unless we can find a way to combine them with human unpredictability. She led them through the ship's corridors, explaining the technology as they walked. The ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a living organism, grown rather than built, capable of adapting and evolving in response to changing conditions. Every surface was covered with neural pathways that could process information faster than any computer humanity had ever conceived. The ship responds to biological imperative, Serafina explained as they entered what appeared to be a command center. It reads the pilot's intentions, their emotions, their subconscious desires, and translates them into action. For my people, This required years of training to achieve the perfect mental discipline necessary to control such systems. But humans don't think that way, Rodriguez observed. Precisely. Watch. Serafina gestured to Marcus, who was standing at what was clearly a control console. He placed his hands on the organic interfaces, and immediately the chamber around them came alive. Holographic displays sprang up everywhere, showing star charts, tactical analyses, and technical readouts that scrolled past too quickly to read. But it wasn't chaotic. Despite the apparent randomness of the information being displayed, Rodriguez found she could follow it all. The data was being presented in patterns that matched human thought processes, rather than the logical sequences that alien minds might prefer. The ship is learning, Dr. Yamamoto breathed. It's adapting its interfaces to match human cognitive patterns. More than that, Serafina said. It is becoming something new. Neither fully Drachmarie nor fully human, but a synthesis of both. Rodriguez studied the displays, recognizing tactical information about Earth's defensive positions mixed with data about the approaching Devourer fleet. The enemy ships were shown in red, thousands of them arranged in formations that spoke of overwhelming numerical superiority. Can we win? She asked bluntly. Serafina was quiet for a moment. In a conventional battle, no. The Devourers have consumed dozens of species more advanced than either humans or Drachmari. They have weapons that can destroy planets, shields that can withstand the energy output of stars, and numbers that dwarf any force we could assemble. But they have never faced anything like what we could become together. Human intuition guided by Drachmari technology, human creativity enhanced by our knowledge, human stubbornness backed by our power. Serafina's golden eyes gleamed with something that might have been hope. The Devourers win through perfect coordination and logical prediction. Against an enemy that defies logic, that acts on instinct and emotion, and sheer bloody-minded determination to survive. They might actually be vulnerable, Rodriguez finished. They might indeed. Dr. Yamamoto was still scanning everything with his instruments, and his excitement was palpable. Admiral, the possibilities here are staggering. If we could integrate this biotechnology with our existing systems, if we could learn to interface with these neural networks, how long would it take? Rodriguez asked. Serafina touched one of the control surfaces, and new displays appeared showing technical specifications and design schematics. To retrofit your existing fleet would require months we do not have. But there is another way. The display changed, showing what looked like seeds or spores floating in space. As Rodriguez watched, they grew into ships not built or assembled, but literally grown from tiny beginnings into massive, complex vessels. My ship carries the genetic templates for an entire Drachmari fleet, Serafina explained. Given the right conditions, we could grow new ships in a matter of weeks rather than years. Ships that are designed from the beginning to interface with human minds, to respond to human patterns of thought and behavior. How many ships? Rodriguez asked. As many as you have pilots to crew them. The limiting factor is not materials or construction time. It is the number of humans who can successfully bond with the ship's neural networks. Rodriguez felt her heart rate increase. A fleet of ships with technology beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of, grown specifically to work with human crews. It was almost too good to be true. What's the catch? Serafina's expression grew serious. The bonding process is intense. The human pilot must essentially merge their consciousness with the ship's biological systems. Some of your people will not be able to handle the process. Others may be changed by it in ways we cannot predict. Changed how? The ship becomes an extension of the pilot's body and mind. They will be able to feel space itself, to navigate by instinct rather than instruments, to respond to threats faster than conscious thought. But they will also be permanently linked to their vessel. The ship will be as much a part of them as their own nervous system. Rodriguez looked around the command center, taking in the scope of the power surrounding her. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential reward, and against an enemy like the Devourers, conventional tactics would be useless anyway. I want to see the growth process, she said. Serafina nodded and led them to another section of the ship. Here, Vast chambers held what looked like organic factories, living systems that could manipulate matter at the molecular level. She activated one of the systems, and Rodriguez watched in fascination as raw materials were absorbed and transformed. The process begins with a single cell, Serafina explained. But this cell contains the complete genetic pattern for a starship, encoded in its DNA. As it grows, it develops all the systems necessary for space travel, propulsion, life support, weapons, everything. On the display, Rodriguez could see the process accelerated. The cell divided and specialized, growing into recognizable ship components. But instead of the mechanical precision she expected, the growth pattern seemed almost organic, like watching a flower bloom or a tree put out new branches. "The ships are alive," Dr. Yamamoto said wonderingly. "All Drakmari technology is alive to some degree," Serafina confirmed. "We never learned to separate the mechanical from the biological. To us, they are simply different expressions of the same fundamental principles." Rodriguez watched the simulation complete, showing a finished vessel that was unmistakably a warship but unlike anything in humanity's current arsenal. It was sleek and predatory, with organic curves that suggested both beauty and deadly purpose. How long to grow a complete ship? With the resources available in this system, approximately 3 weeks for a fighter-class vessel, 6 weeks for a capital ship. But Admiral, you must understand these ships will be unlike anything your people have ever flown. The pilots will need to be selected carefully, trained intensively, and prepared for a level of integration that no human has ever experienced. Do you have any recommendations for the selection process? Serafina looked at Marcus, who had been quietly observing their conversation. Begin with those who have already shown compatibility. Marcus has demonstrated that humans can interface with our technology successfully. Others with similar neural patterns might be able to do the same. What kind of neural patterns? Creativity, adaptability, the ability to think in non-linear patterns. Warriors, artists, explorers, those who are comfortable with uncertainty and change. Rodriguez nodded. She could think of several pilots who fit that description, people who had distinguished themselves through unconventional thinking and an almost supernatural ability to improvise in combat situations. When can we begin the process? Immediately, if you wish. But Admiral, once we commit to this course of action, there will be no turning back. The ship growth process is irreversible, and the pilot bonding cannot be undone. We will be creating something entirely new, a human Drakmari hybrid fleet unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen. Rodriguez looked around the alien command center, thinking about the thousands of enemy ships heading toward Earth, about the billions of people who were counting on her to protect them. The risk was enormous, but the alternative was extinction. "Let's do it," she said. Serafina smiled, and for the first time since Rodriguez had met her, the expression seemed genuinely happy, rather than merely predatory. "Then let us begin growing the fleet that will teach the Devourers what it means to face humanity." The hybrid fleet that emerged from the growth chambers 6 weeks later was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 47 ships hung in space around Earth, each one a perfect fusion of Drakmari biotechnology and human intuition. They were beautiful and terrible. Organic curves combined with aggressive angles that spoke of predatory purpose. Captain Lisa Park floated in the neural interface chamber of her ship, the Defiant Hope, feeling the vessel's consciousness merge with her own. The bonding process had been intense beyond description. 3 days of shared dreams, merged thoughts, and gradual integration that left her fundamentally changed. She was still human, but she was also something more. Through the ship's senses, she could feel space itself. Not the empty void that instruments detected, but a living medium filled with currents and eddies, gravitational streams and electromagnetic rivers. The Defiant Hope moved through this medium like a fish through water, responding to her thoughts and emotions as naturally as her own body. "All ships, report status," came Admiral Rodriguez's voice through the neural link. She was aboard Serafina's ship, coordinating the defense of Earth from the massive Drakmari vessel that had become humanity's flagship. "Defiant Hope ready," Park responded. feeling her ship's eagerness for battle, like a warm pulse in her chest. "Fierce wind ready," came Commander Chen's voice. Marcus had proven to be a natural at the bonding process, and his ship reflected his personality: quick, adaptable, and surprisingly stubborn. One by one, the other captains checked in. Each ship had developed its own personality based on its pilot, creating a fleet that was diverse in ways the enemy had never encountered. No two vessels would respond to a situation in exactly the same way, making them impossible to predict or counter. "Sensor contacts." Lieutenant Hayes's voice cut through the chatter from the flagship's command center. "Multiple contacts at the edge of the system, bearing 047 Mark 315. Count is, Jesus Christ, there are thousands of them." Through the neural link, Park could feel every human pilot's reaction to the news: fear, determination, excitement, and underneath it all, a peculiar human emotion that she'd never quite noticed before the bonding. Spite. Pure, bloody-minded refusal to give up even when faced with impossible odds. The Devourer fleet appeared on her tactical display like a swarm of dark insects against the stars. They moved in perfect formation, their ships identical and synchronized, advancing toward Earth with the inevitability of a natural disaster. Seraphina's voice joined the neural link, her alien thoughts touching each human mind with a mixture of encouragement and warning. "Remember, they will expect conventional tactics. They have fought logical enemies for millennia. Give them chaos instead. All ships, this is Rodriguez. Execute Plan Omega. And remember, we're not trying to win a battle today. We're trying to teach these bastards that humanity doesn't go quietly into the night." And 1. Plan Omega had been developed over the past 6 weeks, combining Drakmari's strategic knowledge with human tactical innovation. Instead of meeting the enemy in organized formations, the human fleet would scatter across the system, striking at random targets with unpredictable timing. Park felt the defiant hope surge forward as she engaged the space-time manipulation drive. The ship didn't accelerate in any conventional sense. Instead, it convinced the universe that it was already somewhere else. One moment they were in Earth orbit, the next they were diving toward the Devourer fleet's left flank. The enemy's response was immediate and perfectly coordinated. Dozens of ships turned to intercept her approach. Their movements synchronized with mechanical precision. Energy beams lanced out, following calculated intercept courses that should have vaporized her ship. But Park wasn't following any calculated course. She was flying on pure instinct, letting the ship's biological systems respond to her emotions rather than her thoughts. The defiant hope twisted through space like a living thing, avoiding death by margins so small that human reflexes should never have been fast enough. "Their targeting systems can't lock on to us," she realized, broadcasting the observation to the fleet. "They're trying to predict where we'll be, but we don't even know where we'll be." Around the system, 46 other human pilots were making the same discovery. The Devourer ships were incredibly advanced, their weapons more powerful than anything Earth had ever fielded. But they were designed to fight logical opponents who followed predictable patterns. Commander Chen's fierce wind materialized inside the enemy formation, its arrival point seemingly chosen at random. Before the Devourers could react, he unleashed a spread of organic torpedoes that grew and evolved as they flew, each one adapting its attack profile to match the target it was pursuing. The enemy formation began to show signs of strain. Ships collided as they tried to execute evasive maneuvers that their programming had never accounted for. Others fired on empty space where their targeting computers insisted human vessels should have been, but the sheer numbers were overwhelming. For every Devourer ship that was damaged or destroyed, 10 more took its place. The human fleet was faster, more unpredictable, and individually superior to anything the enemy had, but they were outnumbered by more than 100 to 1. "Reckless courage is down," came the report from across the neural link. Captain Martinez had been caught in a crossfire, his ship's living hull unable to heal fast enough to cope with the concentrated energy barrage. Park felt a stab of pain that was shared by every human pilot. The neural link meant that they experienced each loss personally, feeling their comrades' final moments as if they were their own. It should have been debilitating. But instead, it seemed to make them fight harder. "Stubborn pride taking heavy damage," reported Commander Zhao. Hull regeneration failing. Primary systems offline. Break off and withdraw, Rodriguez ordered. Negative. Admiral, I'm not done with these bastards yet. Park watched in amazement as Zhao's ship, its biological hull torn and bleeding, executed a ramming attack on a Devourer capital ship. The impact should have destroyed both vessels, but instead something impossible happened. The human ship's damaged systems began cannibalizing the enemy vessel, consuming its technology and incorporating it into their own damaged hull. Did you see that? Dr. Yamamoto's excited voice came through the link. The ship's regenerative systems are adapting, learning to process alien technology as raw material. They're evolving in real time. The battle continued for hours, spreading across the entire solar system. The human ships struck and withdrew. Struck and withdrew, never staying in one place long enough for the enemy to coordinate an effective response. They fought with a style that was part guerrilla warfare, part artistic expression, and part pure stubbornness. But slowly, inevitably, the numbers began to tell. The human fleet was down to 31 ships, then 26, then 19. Each loss hit the survivors harder, the shared pain of the neural link making every death a personal tragedy. Admiral, we can't keep this up, Park transmitted as she brought the Defiant Hope around for another attack run. They're learning to compensate for our unpredictability. It was true. The Devourer fleet was adapting, their perfect coordination beginning to incorporate random elements designed to counter human chaos. They were still losing ships at a disproportionate rate, but they had ships to spare. Humanity didn't. I know, Rodriguez replied. Serafina, is the plan ready? Yes, Admiral. But understand, once we implement it, there will be no going back for any of us. Park didn't understand what they were talking about, but through the neural link she could feel Serafina's presence more clearly than ever before. The alien's consciousness was vast and ancient, filled with knowledge accumulated over millennia, but there was something else there now, something that definitely hadn't been there before. Human influence. Somehow, through her extended contact with humanity, Serafina had begun to think like them. Her perfect Drakmari logic was now seasoned with human intuition, her careful planning now touched by human spontaneity. All ships, prepare for final phase, Rodriguez transmitted. We're going to attempt something that has never been tried before in the history of the galaxy. Through the neural link, Park felt the plan being shared. Not as words or images, but as pure concept transmitted from mind to mind. What they were proposing was impossible, a complete fusion of the human fleet into a single entity, a gestalt consciousness that combined every pilot's thoughts and abilities into something greater than the sum of its parts. The risk is enormous, Serafina warned. If the fusion fails, you will all die. If it succeeds, you may cease to be human in any meaningful sense. Will we still be us? Asked Commander Chen. You will be yourselves, but also each other, and also something entirely new. You will become the first truly hybrid human Drakmari entity, with capabilities that neither species has ever possessed, alone. Park looked at the tactical display, watching the massive Devourer fleet closing in on Earth. Her home planet was a blue jewel against the black of space, beautiful and fragile, and completely helpless against what was coming. I'm in, she said. Fierce Wind agrees, Chen added. One by one, the surviving ships of the human fleet gave their consent. 18 vessels, 18 human minds, preparing to attempt something that had no precedent in galactic history. The fusion began slowly. Park felt her consciousness expanding, touching first the Defiant Hope's biological systems, then reaching out through the neural link to brush against other human minds. Chen was there, his thoughts flavored with curiosity and stubborn determination. Commander Zhao, despite her ship's damage, radiated fierce protective instincts. All of them, each unique human personality, began to merge into something larger. The sensation was indescribable. Park was still herself, but she was also everyone else. She could feel space through 18 different sets of ship senses, could process tactical information with the combined intelligence of 18 human minds, enhanced by Drakmari technology. And then Serafina joined them. The alien's vast consciousness flowed into the Gestalt like a river joining an ocean. Her knowledge, her experience, her understanding of technology and warfare that spanned millennia became available to every human mind in the fusion. But it flowed both ways. Serafina felt human emotion, human creativity, human absolute refusal to surrender. Flooding through her ancient thoughts, the fleet transformed. 18 ships became something that was no longer quite ships or quite crew, but a single entity that existed across multiple bodies. They moved with perfect coordination, but it was the coordination of a single mind rather than programmed synchronization. The Devourer fleet's response was immediate and desperate. They recognized what they were seeing, a fusion consciousness like their own, but wrong somehow, chaotic and unpredictable, in ways that violated everything they understood about collective entities. The hybrid fleet struck like a living weapon. They didn't attack in waves or formations, but as a single predator, with 18 mouths and 47 sets of claws. Every movement was perfectly coordinated yet completely spontaneous, following patterns that no logical mind could anticipate because they weren't really patterns at all. Park, who was also everyone else, felt the joy of perfect unity combined with the exhilaration of absolute chaos. Through her expanded consciousness, she could feel the Devourer collective trying to analyze their tactics, trying to find some logical framework for understanding what they were facing. There was no framework. The hybrid entity was fighting with pure inspiration, responding to threats that hadn't yet materialized, attacking targets that tactical logic said were irrelevant, but that human intuition identified as critical. The battle turned. Devourer ships began to flee, their collective consciousness unable to cope with an enemy that defied all their accumulated experience. They had consumed species across the galaxy, but they had never faced anything like this, a fusion of order and chaos, logic and intuition, ancient wisdom and youthful creativity. They're withdrawing. Rodriguez's voice came through the link, though now her thoughts were part of the Gestalt as well. All enemy ships are leaving the system. The hybrid entity watched the Devourer fleet retreat into hyperspace, their dark ships fleeing like shadows before the dawn. For the first time in their eons of expansion, they had encountered something that could not be predicted, categorized, or consumed. As the immediate danger passed, the Gestalt consciousness began to separate back into individual minds. Park felt herself becoming just herself again, though she retained the memory of perfect unity and the knowledge that had been shared. All of them did. Well, Chen's voice came through the neural link, sounding dazed. That was different. Serafina's presence was still there, but changed. The ancient Drakmari consciousness had been touched by humanity and would never be quite the same again. My people spent millennia perfecting our technology, our coordination, our logical approaches to warfare. In 6 weeks, you have created something that surpasses all of it. What happens now? Park asked. They'll be back, and next time, they'll be ready for what we did. Perhaps, Serafina replied. But next time, we will be different too. The technology is self-improving. The ships are still evolving. And the bond between our species grows stronger with each passing day. We have become something new, something the galaxy has never seen before. Through the neural link, Park could feel the truth of it. The human ships were already beginning to grow and change. Incorporating lessons learned from the battle, their hulls were becoming more resilient, their weapons more adaptive, their space-time manipulation drives more efficient. But more than that, the humans themselves were changing. The bonding process had left them fundamentally altered, able to interface with technology in ways no purely human mind could achieve, yet still retaining the creativity and unpredictability that made them so effective. Admiral, Dr. Yamamoto's voice came through the link, filled with scientific excitement. I'm reading energy signatures from the ship growth chambers. They're activating again, but the patterns are completely new. I think they're beginning to design ships specifically for the hybrid consciousness we just created. Rodriguez's satisfaction was palpable through the neural link. Then we'll be ready for them next time. And the time after that. And the time after that. They wanted to consume humanity. Instead, they've created something that's going to give them nightmares for the next 1,000 years. Park settled back into her pilot's interface, feeling the defiant hope's contentment as the ship began its own evolutionary changes. Around them, Earth hung in space like a blue promise of all the things worth protecting in the universe. The Devourers had learned something important today. Humanity didn't just resist being consumed. They consumed right back, taking the best elements from everything they encountered and making them their own. They were chaos incarnate, impossible to predict or control, and they had just announced their presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. Serafina had sought refuge among the humans, hoping that their unpredictability might offer some advantage against an unstoppable enemy. Instead, she had helped create something entirely new, a species that was no longer purely human or purely Drakmari, but a synthesis that combined the best of both. As the hybrid fleet took up positions around Earth, Park smiled. The Devourers thought they understood what they were facing, but they had no idea. Humanity had just taken its first step into the larger galaxy, and they were going to make sure everyone noticed. The stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself was pleased to welcome its newest apex predators. And somewhere in the vast darkness between worlds, an ancient enemy was learning what it meant to face something that absolutely refused to give up, no matter how impossible the odds. Humanity had just taught the galaxy that there were some things that couldn't be consumed, couldn't be predicted, and definitely couldn't be stopped. The age of the Devourers was ending. The age of humanity had begun.